Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the stories. The rust-colored Ford Bronco coughed its last gasp of diesel fumes as I cut the ignition, the sudden silence amplified by the vast, empty scrubland stretching to every horizon. Above me, the twin stacks of the Valerium nuclear facility clawed at the bruised twilight sky, monuments to a forgotten dream, or perhaps a nightmare. Home sweet home, Dr. Elias Thorne, I muttered, the words dissolving into the dry, whispering wind. I slammed the truck door shut, the metallic clang echoing eerily in the stillness. My duffel bag, heavy with clothes, a few books, and a worn photo of Sarah, felt like an anchor dragging me down. The other bag, the one containing my specialized equipment, the latest gamma spectrometers, neutron detectors, a trio of high-sensitivity Geiger counters, felt less like tools and more like talismans against a darkness I wasn't ready to define. Valerium had been mothballed for 30 years. Decommissioned, disassembled, or so the official records claimed. Yet in the last 6 months, a remote monitoring station, a relic from the plant's operational days, had begun spitting out anomalous data. Fluctuations in ambient radiation levels that defied all logic, spikes that vanished as quickly as they appeared, ghost signals, a phantom pulse from a dead heart. My boss, Dr. Anya Sharma, at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, had initially dismissed it as sensor degradation, a fault in ancient wiring. But the data had persisted, growing more frequent, more intense, until a pattern, however bizarre, began to emerge. It wasn't random noise, it was deliberate. "Go check it out, Elias," she'd said, her voice betraying a hint of unease. "Just a quick sweep, calibrate, verify, declare it a ghost in the machine, come back home." But the way she'd avoided my gaze, the slight tremor in her hands as she'd handed me the security override codes, told a different story. The main gate was a formidable lattice of rusted steel, its guardhouse a skeleton of shattered windows and peeling paint. I keyed in the code, and with a groan that seemed to tear through the fabric of the desolate landscape, the ancient motor sputtered to life, dragging the heavy barrier aside. The sound was a symphony of agony, metal shrieking against metal, a protest from the facility itself. Inside, the paved road was cracked and choked with weeds, leading to the administrative building, a squat, concrete monolith that seemed to absorb what little light remained. The building's entrance was secured by a heavy, reinforced door. More codes, more metallic protests as the locks disengaged. The air inside was thick, stale, laden with the scent of dust, decay, and something else, something faintly metallic and acrid, like old electronics and ozone. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing rows of cubicles, their plastic partitions warped, ancient CRT monitors gathering dust like petrified artifacts. It was a tomb of forgotten bureaucracy. I found the main control room on the second floor. The door, once a secure bulkhead, hung askew on broken hinges. Stepping inside was like entering the brain of a sleeping leviathan. A wall of amberlit mimic boards glowed faintly, depicting the plant's complex layout, the reactor vessel at its heart. Below them, rows upon rows of defunct consoles, their screens dark, their buttons faded and brittle. Dust motes danced in my flashlight beam like spectral snowflakes. I set up my temporary workstation on a console that still had an intact surface, carefully unpacking my equipment. The main Geiger counter, a sturdy handheld unit, was the first to be powered on. Its display flickered to life, showing a steady 0.08 microsieverts per hour, typical background radiation. The silence of the control room was absolute, broken only by the soft hum of my electronics. My task was simple: calibrate my equipment against the old remote sensors, confirm their readings were garbage, then run a full sweep of the facility. A week, maybe two, get in, get out. The first anomaly hit at 2:17. I was reviewing the facility schematics, cross-referencing old radiation maps, when the handheld Geiger counter, sitting innocently on the console, shrieked. A piercing, frantic series of clicks that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I snatched it up, my eyes glued to the display. 1.54 micro SV/HR, then 3.12, then 5.89. A cold dread tightened my chest. That was a significant spike, dangerously so. I swept the room, my heart hammering against my ribs. The clicks were localized, intense, emanating from everywhere and nowhere. The air itself seemed to vibrate with an unseen energy. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The counter settled back to 0.08 micro SV/HR, as if nothing had happened. I checked the logs on the remote monitoring station's data stream, which I had just gotten connected and synced. Nothing, no spike recorded, my own equipment, my own eyes. Faulty unit, I mumbled, trying to convince myself. But I knew this Geiger counter. It was new, calibrated weekly. I powered on a second unit. It too read 0.08. Sleep was a long time coming that night. Every creak of the old building, every gust of wind rattling the broken windows, sounded like an approaching threat. I slept fitfully on a cot I'd set up in an old office adjacent to the control room, my hand never far from a heavy wrench I'd found. The next few days blurred into a pattern of escalating confusion. I meticulously set up a network of sensors throughout the control room, each feeding data to my central laptop. I wanted redundancy proof. The spikes continued. Short, sharp bursts of radiation, often lasting only a few seconds, sometimes a minute. They occurred randomly, sometimes several times an hour, sometimes once every few hours. My sensors would scream, their digital readouts climbing into the red, only to fall silent again, leaving no trace on the facility's decaying infrastructure or the remote monitoring station I was still trying to confirm as faulty. The locations of these spikes were equally baffling. One moment, a hotspot by a defunct circuit breaker. The next, a burst of gamma in the middle of the room. Then, a faint neutron flux from behind the main console wall. It was chaotic, impossible. The psychological toll began almost immediately. I started questioning my equipment. Was it a batch defect? Had the journey affected them? I ran diagnostics repeatedly, cross-referenced with a third backup unit. Everything checked out. My instruments were working perfectly, so the radiation was real. But why wasn't the old remote station registering it? Why was it so localized, so transient? One evening, while tracing an old power conduit in a maintenance tunnel beneath the control room, my primary Geiger counter, clipped to my belt, began to chatter softly. I paused, listening, a low, persistent clicking barely above background. I knelt, sweeping the detector slowly along the rough concrete floor. The clicks intensified slightly over a particular spot, then faded. I marked the spot with a piece of chalk. A few minutes later, further down the tunnel, the counter shrieked again, 4.2 micro SV/HR. I spun around, sweeping frantically. Nothing. It vanished as I turned. I decided to try a different approach. Instead of waiting for a spike, I would try to find the source. I chose the reactor containment building, the heart of the plant. If anything was radiating, it would be there. The containment building was a colossal concrete dome, its interior an echoing void of rusted gantries, silent cranes, and immense, inert machinery. The air was colder here, heavy with the weight of disuse and immense scale. My breath plumed in the stale air. I wore a full hazmat suit, though the official records assured me the area was safe, the spent fuel rods long since removed and transported. But the readings, the phantom readings, made me distrust everything. Inside the primary containment vessel, the reactor core itself was a gaping maw of deactivated systems, dark and silent. I set up a more robust array of long-term dosimeters, hoping to catch something sustained. Hours passed. The silence was profound, broken only by my own breathing and the occasional distant creak of metal settling. My headlamp cut through the oppressive darkness, illuminating strange graffiti on the concrete walls, faded warnings, angry scrawls from a bygone era of workers. Then it happened, not a spike, a surge. My main Geiger counter didn't just click, it screamed. A continuous high-pitched wail that filled my ears, cutting through the silence like a knife. The display flashed wildly, 10, 12.5, 15.8, and climbing. My heart slammed against my ribs. This was beyond anomalous. This was dangerous. My skin prickled with an unholy cold despite the insulated suit. I spun, my light beam sweeping frantically around the cavernous space. The wail was everywhere. It felt like the air itself was screaming. Through the static-filled audio of the Geiger counter, I heard something else, faint at first, then growing clearer. A whisper. It wasn't a word, not really. More like a sibilant sigh, a dragging breath that seemed to emanate from the very walls, from the dark, gaping maw of the reactor core itself. HELP, my blood ran cold. My mind instantly tried to rationalize it. Echoes, exhaustion. Static feedback, the radiation display hit 20.1 micro SV/HR. My dosimeters would be overloading. I had to get out. I stumbled backward, tripping over a loose cable. The whisper intensified. This time it was clearer, more than one voice, overlapping like a distorted chorus. Lost we are, the heat, burning. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding a frantic drum solo against my ribs. The air felt thick, heavy, as if I were underwater. My vision swam. The Geiger counter continued its banshee wail, a relentless auditory assault. I ran. Blindly, clumsily, my heavy boots clanking against the metal floor, my breath rasping in my throat. I didn't stop until I burst out of the containment building, ripping off my hazmat helmet, gasping for air. The Geiger counter, still clutched in my trembling hand, had settled back to 0.08 micro SV/HR. The silence was absolute once more. The whispers were gone. The phantom radiation had vanished, leaving only the memory of its scream. Back in the control room, shaking, I reviewed the data logs. My array of long-term dosimeters within the containment building had registered nothing. No sustained spike, just a brief, localized burst of intense radiation that vanished as quickly as it came. My personal Geiger counter was the only thing that had recorded it. The official facility sensors, still tied into the old system, remained dormant, reporting nothing. It was then I realized the true horror. The old monitoring system wasn't faulty, it was blind, or perhaps it was being ignored. Whatever was here, it was capable of manipulating energy, of creating radiation that only my modern, sensitive equipment could detect, and it was doing so with a terrifying precision, appearing and disappearing at will. And the voices, I tried to rationalize them away. Auditory hallucinations induced by stress, exhaustion, and the sheer eeriness of the place. But the memory of the chilling whispers, the distinct feeling of multiple, suffering voices, clung to me like a shroud. I pulled up the blueprints of the facility, tracing the path from the reactor core. Spent fuel pool. It had to be the spent fuel pool. Even decommissioned, there could be residual activity, though not enough to cause such spikes. But if something was amplifying it, the spent fuel pool was located in an adjacent building, a massive, reinforced concrete structure. The records indicated it had been drained years ago, the fuel rods removed. But given the other inconsistencies, I had to see for myself. Entering the building, the air was even colder, damper. A faint, earthy smell mingled with the acrid metallic tang. My flashlight beam danced across enormous empty concrete basins, their interiors stained with residue, an eerie, luminous green in some places, like sickly moss. I approached the main pool, a rectangular chasm in the floor, descending several stories. I peered over the edge. It was dark, empty, except for a few feet of brackish, stagnant water at the very bottom. My Geiger counter was silent. I began to walk around the perimeter, my boots echoing. The vastness of the space, the sheer emptiness, pressed down on me. It felt like I was walking through a graveyard of colossal proportions. Then, a flicker. In the stagnant water at the bottom of the main pool, a faint, greenish light pulsed. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. I squinted, leaning closer. My Geiger counter screamed. This time it was different, not just a spike. It was a sustained, agonizing wail. The display surged past 20, past 30. It settled at 38.75 micro SV/HR, a level that would cause severe radiation sickness within hours of sustained exposure. And the light in the pool pulsed faster, growing brighter. It wasn't just green now, it was a chaotic swirl of green and a sickly, pulsing red. The whispers returned, more distinct, more desperate. Agony forever, no escape from the heat. The reactor, it calls. I staggered back, covering my ears, but the sound, the voices, penetrated everything. The radiation was physical now, a buzzing sensation on my skin, a metallic taste in my mouth. My head throbbed, and then in the swirling light at the bottom of the pool I saw them. Shapes, not clearly defined, but forms. Elongated, shimmering, like heat haze given malevolent consciousness. They writhed, twisting within the glowing water, their forms indistinct, yet undeniably humanoid. Their movements were slow, agonizing, as if trapped in an invisible current. One of them, a form that seemed to coalesce slightly more than the others, looked up. Or rather, a vague impression of a head turned towards me, 2 points of light like eyes, burning with an ancient, suffering intelligence. It was trying to reach me, its shimmering arm extended, stretching towards me, a silent, desperate plea or a terrifying invitation. The Geiger counter wailed its agony. My vision flickered. I felt a surge of nausea, a dizzying sense of disassociation. This wasn't radiation poisoning, this was something else. I backed away, slowly at first, then scrambling, tumbling, my fear a cold, hard knot in my stomach. The light in the pool flared one last time, an angry, emerald and blood-red explosion, then plunged back into darkness. The Geiger counter quieted, 0.08 micro SV/HR, as if nothing had ever happened. I spent the next 2 days holed up in the control room, a prisoner of my own terror. I called Anya, my voice hoarse, ragged. "Elias, what's going on? You sound awful." "Are you getting enough sleep?" she asked, her concern laced with irritation. "The readings, Anya, they're impossible, intense, localized spikes, then nothing. My equipment is fine. The facility's old sensors register nothing. And then there are voices." A pause. "Voices, Elias, are you sure you're okay? This is a high-stress environment. Solitude can play tricks on the mind." "I saw them, Anya, shapes in the spent fuel pool. They're residual, energy, sentient. They're creating the radiation, or attracting it, I don't know. It's not just faulty equipment, Anya, it's something supernatural." Another, longer pause. I could almost hear her sigh. "Elias, I understand this is difficult. But we deal in science, not ghosts. You're overtired. Pack up. I'm sending a team in tomorrow with a new set of calibrated equipment and a psychiatrist." A psychiatrist. She thought I was losing my mind. Perhaps I was. That night I didn't even try to sleep. I just sat at the console, watching my monitors, drinking stale coffee. The facility felt alive around me. Every creak, every groan, every whisper of the wind seemed imbued with malevolent intent. I heard them again, faint at first, a collective murmur, then growing louder. They weren't just in the reactor building or the spent fuel pool anymore. They were here, in the control room. The core it hungers, return to the heat. You cannot leave us, my skin crawled. I grabbed a flashlight, shining it into the dark corners of the control room. Nothing. Only shadows that seemed to deepen and writhe at the edges of my vision. My Geiger counter, which I'd set up to monitor the room continuously, began to click softly. Not a scream, just a low, rhythmic pulse like a slow heartbeat. 0.15 micro SV/HR, then 0.2, then 0.25. It was a slow, creeping accumulation, not a spike, but a steady, inexorable rise. And then the screens of the old control panels began to flicker. Amber lights, dormant for decades, sparked to life, then died. Digital displays, long since dead, glowed faintly with meaningless numbers, then winked out. One by one, then in rapid succession, a ghostly symphony of obsolete technology resurrecting itself. On the main mimic board, the diagram of the reactor core, its amber light began to pulse, slowly at first, then quickening. It was mimicking a startup sequence, a reactor coming online. I watched, horrified, transfixed by the impossible display. My Geiger counter's slow climb continued. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and something else, something metallic and burnt, like an overheating circuit board. The voices coalesced, surrounding me, pressing in. Join us, Elias, become one with the light. The heat, it is peace. I clapped my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. No, get out of my head. When I opened my eyes, the control room was bathed in an eerie green luminescence. The old panels weren't just flickering anymore. They were fully lit, their dials twitching, their gauges fluttering, showing impossible readings. The mimic board glowed with an aggressive green, indicating active systems, critical states. My Geiger counter screamed, 50 micro SV/HR, its digital display a blur of frantic numbers. And standing before me, where the main console curved, was a shimmering, indistinct form. Taller than a man, gaunt, its outline wavering like heat from asphalt. 2 points of green light, like eyes, burned in its face. It raised a translucent hand, pointing towards the mimic board, towards the pulsing green light of the reactor core. Come, the core calls for you. The voice was singular now, deep and resonant, yet still imbued with that ancient, terrible suffering. It was in my head, not in the air. Panic seized me. This wasn't science. This wasn't a malfunction. This was real, and it was here for me. I stumbled back, knocking over my chair. I had to get out. I ran for the door, scrambling through the administrative building, the eerie green light seeming to follow me, cast from unseen sources. I reached the Bronco, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so violently I could barely insert the key into the ignition. The engine turned over with a wheeze, then sputtered to life. I slammed it into reverse, tires spitting gravel. As I drove, my headlights cut through the gloom. In my rearview mirror, I saw it. The entire Valerium nuclear facility, its immense concrete structures, its twin cooling towers, were bathed in a pulsating, sickly green light. It seemed to breathe, to pulse with a malevolent life. And above the main containment building, a pillar of shimmering emerald light reached into the sky, touching the bruised clouds, a beacon of unspeakable energy. My Geiger counter, still shrieking on the passenger seat, was maxed out. It had gone past its limits. I floored the accelerator, the old Bronco roaring down the cracked road towards the main gate. But the gate, the heavy, rusted steel gate, was closed, locked. I had pulled it open with the override code, but now it was sealed as if I had never come through. I slammed on the brakes, the Bronco skidding to a halt. I jumped out, running to the gate, rattling the rusted bars. They were solid, immovable. A low hum vibrated through the ground, rising from the facility. The air grew warm, thick. The green light intensified, and I could hear the whispers again, a multitude of desperate voices, rising in a terrifying crescendo. You cannot escape the core. We are hungry for life, forever with us. I looked back at the facility. The shimmering forms were emerging from the buildings, dozens of them, translucent, glowing green, drifting towards the gate, towards me. They moved with a slow, agonizing grace, their collective whispers forming a terrifying symphony of suffering and hunger. My mind snapped. My Geiger counter lay forgotten in the Bronco, screaming its useless warning. The green light enveloped me, warm and inviting, yet utterly horrifying. One of the forms, taller, more defined than the others, drifted close to the gate. Its face, a vague impression of human features, seemed to smile, a horrifying, silent welcome. It reached out, its shimmering hand passing through the metal bars, through my own outstretched arm. A cold fire spread through my veins, not painful but deeply, profoundly unsettling. It felt like my very essence was being drawn, like liquid metal flowing towards a magnet. The whisper entered my mind again, no longer just a sound, but a direct thought, cold and alien. Welcome home, Elias. The core has been waiting. My legs gave out. I fell to my knees, the ground vibrating beneath me. My vision blurred, the world dissolving into a pulsating green. The whispers became individual thoughts, a chorus of despair and a strange, cold joy, all mingling with my own rapidly disintegrating consciousness. I felt myself being drawn, not physically, but spiritually. My atoms, my very being, pulled towards the pulsating heart of the Valerium facility, towards the core that was now, somehow, alive. I was not escaping. I was becoming part of it, part of the anomaly, part of the endless, hungry hum. My last conscious thought was of Sarah, her face in the worn photograph, fading into the emerald void, replaced by the countless, suffering eyes of Valerium. And then there was only the hum, and the heat, and the whispers, and the readings, of course. For those who would eventually come, perhaps years from now, to check the old remote monitoring station, the data stream would continue to be clean, silent, oblivious. But somewhere deep within the defunct nuclear facility, a new, impossible reading would begin to pulse, a phantom heartbeat in the heart of the dead plant. A whisper not of radiation, but of a new, terrible presence, and it would be waiting.